In this episode of American Greed,
he was a good fisherman. He won tournaments.
He turned the boat around to get that fish. He had to get it.
Barry Hunt is an expert fisherman, angling for big money and reeling them in, hook, line, and sucker.
He wanted anything in the thousands.
Literally, people are throwing money at this guy.
And you always get paid until the day you didn't get paid, and then that was it. That was the end of the game.
And later, a daring art heist that pays off big.
It was probably the worst experience of our lives.
Thieves steal $4 million in art, and American Greed has behind-the-scenes footage from inside the crime scene.
Who would steal these paintings? Is it someone that covets them and wants to own them?
Coastal New Hampshire, where old money meets small-town charm.
Oh, it's a very nice, upscale neighborhood.
An upscale neighborhood peopled with upstanding citizens, like Dr. John Riddell.
That's Barry Hunt's house right there.
Barry Hunt is a larger-than-life local character. He owns a thriving fishing supply business. He travels the world in search of largemouth bass, and he's always quick with a fishing story.
Well, Barry I met soon after I moved here in 1983. Nice enough fellow, soft-spoken, seemed knowledgeable about general items of conversation of the day, and I kind of liked him.
In the fall of 1983, Barry Hunt tells Dr. Riddell about a hot new startup.
He had come across, as I recall, a person who was going out of business who had a number of electronic triangulation devices, fish finders, and things of that nature. He was going out of business, needed money, wanted to unload these, and Barry had already, through his contacts in the fishing world, had a buyer online in another state. So it was just a matter of putting together a little cash, and profit would come quickly and at a very good percentage. For whatever the figure was, $2,500, I decided to take the chance. And in 6 weeks, I had my investment and some profit back. And we're crossing the Exeter River here.
Dr. Riddell is hooked, and so are many others in Exeter. They're doctors, lawyers, business owners.
Certainly the first time I'm aware of Barry Hunt is in a regular Wednesday night poker game.
I might have more than that, Louis.
Ron Willett is an accountant in Exeter.
All right, raise.
In 1986, Barry Hunt joins his poker group. Before long, Hunt has established a ritual. Every few weeks, he hands some of the guys in the group a manila envelope stuffed with cash.
So, of course, when you see a great number of $100 bills changing hands, you can't help but ask, Sal, what's going on? And
Hunt tells Willett that he owns a company called Sports Liquidation. After hearing the pitch about buying distressed marine supplies, Willett decides to take the plunge.
I think in part, having seen other people already get paid a couple of times, it made me a little less anxious about it, but I decided to take a chance, and so I did a small deal.
I'm going to go low.
Willett gets out his checkbook and cuts a check to Barry Hunt.
You got to put money in, though.
Exactly 6 weeks later, Hunt delivers the goods.
And the money was always in cash, and the cash would be, here's your $800 cash, here's a $10,000 check, or would you like to re-up for another deal?
Bottom cards in play. Same game again?
Yeah.
Willett re-ups, and eventually he's on the line for $20,000.
He was a good fisherman. He won tournaments.
Carl Woofter is a salesman of fishing equipment who makes regular calls on Barry Hunt. Over time, he becomes increasingly curious about Hunt's company, Sports Liquidation.
I don't think he ever pitched it. I think that after you sat in his office or you hang around, you kind of knew something was going on, and it looked like there was money being made. And, of course, there were papers laying around, and there were numbers on papers, and not that you would sit there and try to look at them, but they were right in front of you. So I don't know if I asked the question or he asked the question. I think probably I said, what's going on?
And with that, the fishing supply salesman puts himself on the hook.
Christmas came every 60 days. And as you made money, of course, you were more willing to part with more money.
Before long, Woofter is in for more than $100,000. All told, more than 50 people have invested in Sports Liquidation to the tune of about $2 million.
Everyone was doing it. It was fun. I guess maybe kids going to Disneyland, it's, you're wide-eyed. Well, this is a whole bunch of cash, and $100 bills just light up anybody's eyes.
It seemed to be quite a reliable operation, and so one thing led to another, and of course they grew in value. I thought I was an entrepreneur.
All along when I would talk to people, we'd say, this is too good to be true, so someday it's got to go bad.
Some investors, like Carl Woofter, have their doubts and occasionally put Hunt to the test.
I would go to him and say, I need that money. I need $30,000 tomorrow. I got to have it for something else. He'd always get it.
Somewhere along the way, we nicknamed Barry Slippery.
Threes are good.
Ron Willett also begins to get an uneasy feeling about Barry Hunt.
The nickname really had to do with how he was playing poker. He would very often make a mistake in how much money he would put in the pot. And the mistake was always too few chips.
Maybe I didn't want to find a flaw.
Meanwhile, other investors are now betting more chips than ever on sports liquidation.
The total figure that I thought I had invested with him was about $140,000. And while that money should have gone into a retirement fund and for college funds for my kids, I also felt maybe I can make a little bit more money on this and investing it in something that seems pretty secure and do better for them.
In the spring of 1989, Hunt tells investors he's lined up a spectacular deal, but he needs an extraordinary amount of capital to make it all work.
I guess his final go-around with a lot of people was to just present them with such an outrageous deal that they had to come up with every cent they could come up with.
Look at the size of that pot.
Yeah. Ron Willett smells a rat and decides to pull the majority of his money out of the pot.
Maybe I just feeling the right vibes and probably just being a little lucky.
Other investors will not be so lucky.
When it was detected that there may be a problem with the accounts, when the accounts were closed, the account was short $1 million or more.
In Exeter, New Hampshire, the halo around local businessman Barry Hunt has lost some of its luster. Hunt's firm, Sports Liquidation, has been giving its investors huge profits, and the dividend checks have arrived like clockwork. Now those checks are bouncing.
I think the check that was returned was probably in the $300,000 range, which certainly is going to get everybody's attention.
Bank East Vice President Peter Anderson takes a closer look at Barry Hunt's checking account. He doesn't like what he sees.
Checks coming in were coming from one or two sources in large amounts. Checks going out were going out to one or two places in large amounts, and that's just a big red flag for a kite.
Barry Hunt has been passing bad checks and covering those checks with more bad checks in an elaborate kiting scheme involving two local banks.
It's like musical chairs. The music stops and somebody doesn't have a chair to sit on. In this case, Bank East didn't have a chair to sit on, and it was a disappointing, shocking situation.
Back in Exeter, the word is out. Barry Hunt's paper is no good, and investors are livid.
My concern is, where's my money?
Well,
Ron Willett and his friends catch up with Hunt at a local clam shack.
We're pressing Barry. Why haven't we been paid? Why haven't we heard from you? Why? All whys. And Barry engages me in small talk, and I let him know, Barry, they're getting concerned. I mean, this could get uncomfortable. And Barry, for the first time I've ever seen him bragging, reaches in his pocket and takes out a very small pistol. And while I think I'm warning him that it could become uncomfortable for him, he's letting me know you guys were the ones at most in harm's way, not me.
A few days after this meeting, Barry Hunt disappears, and investors call the cops.
They explained to me how they would give this person, in most cases, cash.
Detective Lally believes Hunt ran a Ponzi scheme, robbing Peter to pay Paul. and financing the dividend checks with the money from new investors.
And because they do so well at the beginning, more people want to be involved in it. I mean, literally, people are throwing money at this guy.
And apparently they had invested millions of dollars.
FBI agent Thomas Ryan.
You know, in these Ponzi schemes, usually at some point they just become too big to, it's just too difficult to maintain. And it only takes, one slip up and the scheme's over with.
Ryan begins his investigation by sifting through the wreckage of Barry Hunt's bogus paper trail.
When it was detected that there may be a problem with the accounts, when the accounts were closed, the account was short $1 million or more.
Over time, investigators believe that Hunt may have funneled some of that money back to investors to keep the scam afloat. The rest, however, has already been spent by the con man, or left town when he did.
What are you going to do? You knew all along you were taking a chance.
Many investors, like Carl Woofter, were always wary of a day of reckoning, but figured they'd be smart enough to get out before then.
You know, you want to make the money, so you think it's down the road where you'll be out of it, but then who would ever jump out if you're making 10% even on money in 60 days?
And you always get paid until the day you didn't get paid, and then that was it. That was the end of the game.
Ron Moulette was one of the lucky ones.
When all gets said and done, I was into it for $5,000.
A bad feeling about Hunt compelled this veteran poker player to pull most of his chips out of the game before the con man's house of cards collapsed.
I think all of us were aware the deal was too good to be true. And yet we saw that we were getting money. We knew the money we were getting was real. The story had some aspects of it that sounded real. And so you convince yourself it's okay to do this.
For others, the situation is far more sobering.
This is my daughter, Christina. She's the youngest. She's 17, and she's the one who's about to go to college.
Dr. John Riedel lost his daughter's college fund.
That tuition would have been in the bank had it not been for Barry, and now we're going to have to find it somewhere.
Riedel has socialized and fished with Hunt. Now he realizes Hunt was actually fishing for him.
But I think he's pathologic in a sense, and it all stems back to his personality as a professional bass fisherman, I think. If he saw a bass on a nest and that fish didn't take his lure, he'd have to go back. He'd turn the boat around to get that fish. He had to get it. There was something in him. He didn't want that fish to get away. And I think he was doing the same thing with people. He had become a fisher of men in an evil way.
So where is the fisherman con artist? Investigators are short on clues and long on speculation.
I think the trail went cold pretty quickly because as well as a lot of people thought they knew him, they in the final analysis, they really didn't know much about him.
Well, yeah, some people thought somebody caught up with him and finished him off, or that he was in South America, maybe died of malaria hiding in the jungle.
We knew that he had gone out of the country a lot for these fishing tournaments. I guess he went to Costa Rica quite a bit. And so there was some speculation that he might have gone down there to hide out.
But Barry Hunt has not been bumped off by the mob, nor is he in Costa Rica. He's alive and well and fishing in a new pond.
It seemed to be every day we'd learn of a new victim, a new victim, a new victim.
For more information and special web exclusives, log on to americangreed.cnbc.com. Reno, Nevada. The bright lights beckon, promising quick, easy money.
5-4.
And checker bet 4.
Jim Helgett is at the center of the action.
Showtime.
From this perch, the dealer gets a real-world education into the art and science of gambling. When to hold 'em, when to fold 'em, and when to put some money on a long shot.
All right, see what you got. He owned a company, or he said he owned a company called Tool Search.
He is Jonathan Firestone, a poker player who the dealer met through some mutual friends. When a truck overturns or a train goes off the rails, Firestone's company, Tool Search, swoops down, salvages the cargo, and resells the goods for a big profit.
He had a good pitch, and it sounded like it was, he had more business than he knew what to do with. All right, showtime, guys.
Helget's friends are already making money investing in Tool Search, and so the dealer decides to get in the game.
Aces win.
He buys $5,000 worth of chips and puts them all on Tool Search.
For me, it was, it was working out for all these guys that had a lot of money, and I felt like, hey, I'm just a small guy, but I'm playing with the big guys, and I'm making money.
But the gamblers have no idea that Jonathan Firestone is actually the fugitive Barry Richard Hunt, a man with a joker up his sleeve and scores of defrauded investors in his back pocket.
I mean, it wasn't like he was one of these flashy, suave kind of people.
Patricia Patton is a massage therapist who met Firestone at a poker tournament.
He said, I could let you come in for a small amount. He said, realize you probably don't have much to invest, but, I like to help out. I like to be able to help out people.
Patton is starting a new business, and money is tight. She decides to give what little she has to invest in Tool Search.
Oh, I think I started out with like $3,000. I made about, $300? And, he said, do you want your principal back or do you want me to roll it over? And I was like, oh, let's roll it over. And, I did it for a while. And when it kept working really good, I mentioned it to a couple of friends.
Word of Tool Search success is spreading in Reno, and Jonathan Firestone is becoming a very popular man.
Well, the first time I actually spoke to Jonathan, he had just bought his BMW, and he said it was for his 50th birthday present to himself. And I said it was a pretty car, and that's how we started talking.
Elaine Nelson lived with Jonathan Firestone. She invested $15,000 in his company and introduced him to her friends and family.
He always wanted to know more people. He always questioned me about other people I might know that were interested in doing the same thing that I had done.
He could always talk, kind of connect with a lot of people.
Suzette is a friend of Elaine's and fellow stakeholder in Tool Search.
It was kind of like, well, okay, for the first time, it was just kind of, okay, we can try it and see, because we kind of trusted John.
Suzette eventually invested $36,000, and for a time, it seemed like money well spent.
In the short run, it was good. It seemed like it was good. We always got a good percentage back. It was always a quick turnaround. It seemed like it was good, and it was nice.
And life is very good for Tool Search CEO Jonathan Firestone. He lives on a golf course, drives a BMW, and travels the world flying first class. For Elaine, the life of luxury comes with one string attached. Firestone insists that she not ask about his business.
I didn't question. He would tell me that money was coming in, so we were living a great life. The house payment was being paid, I did my own thing, he did his. That was our relationship.
Everybody checks.
But every now and again, an investor decides to put Firestone in the hot seat.
Okay, you bet two or you fold.
In the fall of 2002, Jim Helget contacts Firestone and asks for all his money back.
Check. I did it to test him. I told him that, hey, it's tax time and I really need some money. $2. Bet. Probably in this very short time, actually, it was probably 2 weeks. I had all my money out.
Helget is now more satisfied than ever that Tool Search is on the up and up.
Check or bet two.
He jumps back into the game to get in on Firestone's next big deal.
Okay, showtime.
Yeah, it's supposed to be a really quick deal. We were supposed to get a higher turnaround.
Other investors are getting similar calls. A big deal is in the works, and Firestone says he just needs a little more capital to grease the wheels.
The last time it was like, this will be, at least 15%, maybe more.
And that was about when the house of cards fell down.
On April 5th, 2003, Elaine Nelson comes home to find Firestone frantically packing his bags.
He said, I've got to get out of here. I remember him holding his chest, being very nervous. It was pretty much chaos. And then he was gone.
It was a total shock.
The word travels quickly among Tool Search investors. Firestone is gone, and so is their money.
You feel like you've been hit in the stomach. I'd say. I mean, there was an actual physical feeling.
Yeah, we were all just sick to our stomach that we had lost that money, and we kind of knew that we'd probably never see it again.
If the deal seems too good to be true, it's too good to be legal.
Jay Brown is a detective who hunts con men and fraudsters. On April 8th, Brown gets a phone call from a tool search investor, near and dear to his own nest egg, his stockbroker.
He knew he'd been scammed, and he said that Mr. Firestone had cleaned out all of his personal effects and loaded them into a BMW and was gone.
In Reno, the heat's on Jonathan Firestone, the mastermind behind a company he calls Tool Search. Firestone's dividends are overdue, and investors are antsy. Under pressure, the mastermind packs his bags and skips town.
He was gone. Loaded everything into a BMW and headed south.
Detective Jay Brown begins the hunt for Firestone, with a search warrant for the con man's home and his computer hard drive.
Everything that was generated, all the paperwork that he generated, was in that computer. He had spreadsheets with victims and how much they paid and when their next check was due, and and everything was fraudulent. Every piece of paper that was generated over that 5-year period was all generated in his loft by him to perpetuate this crime.
The Tool Search documents tell the story of a classic Ponzi scheme. There is no business, no products, no sales. Nothing but money shifting from one investor to the next.
His whole life was a lie.
FBI Special Agent Marcus Knutson joins the hunt for Firestone.
Well, Jay and I were kind of behind the 8 ball for a little bit because we didn't get involved with this until after he fled.
This is a typical picture of him right here. Look at the big bass, man. Those are great.
As investigators search for Jonathan Ross Firestone, they come to discover they are chasing a shadow.
Big fish, big fish. The investigation reveals that there's no such person.
Police are unaware that Firestone is actually Barry Richard Hunt, a man who fled New Hampshire under similar circumstances in 1989.
At that point, we're dealing with, okay, we got this guy named Jonathan Firestone, but we don't know who he is. We have photos of him, but we have no clue who this guy is, and that obviously made our hunt for him even more difficult.
They decide to plaster Firestone's face on the FBI's most wanted website.
We were hoping that someone would see that photo and either recognize him from the past or recognize him that he's now living next door to me. We had no idea who this guy was, and we were hoping that somehow we'd be able to figure out who he was.
With the master con man in the wind, his victims are left to cope with the fallout of his crime.
Even though it's a white-collar crime, it just tears people up.
Suzette invested $36,000 in Tool Search.
It really rips a lot of things out of people's lives, even though it's money. But, that's a lot of people's stability.
My retirement is what I'm able to make of it, plus Social Security.
Patricia Patton lost $15,000.
Being self-employed, you've got to keep money, back up in case you get sick. And, it took a major... cushion out of my life.
The whole thing beat me up pretty badly.
Perhaps no one lost more than Elaine Nelson. The con man's girlfriend invested $15,000 and her heart.
You don't trust anybody anymore, and I was scared that I would never be able to find anybody that loved me again, and it was a lonely existence for a little while there, yeah.
For a year and a half, Firestone's location remains a mystery. Then, in the fall of 2004, the FBI gets the phone call they were hoping for.
We get contacted by a woman on the East Coast who said that she had queried Google for a friend that she had met during the summer who was renting a home near her.
The woman lives in a small town on the Jersey Shore. She tells the agents about a man she knows who seems to be hiding from someone.
Yeah, she thought something was weird about him. He would park with his car backed in. He would do weird stuff, stuff that normal human beings would not do.
So she had this, this little tingling on the back of her neck that this guy may not be as legitimate as he claims to be.
But the fugitive is growing careless, referring to himself as Ross Firestone one day, then Jonathan the next.
So she Googles Jonathan Ross Firestone. Boom. The FBI webpage shows up.
And up popped his wanted poster. And she positively identified him as the individual she had contacted.
The woman tells police that Firestone has moved on, but she does give them a number of valuable leads, including the con man's cell phone number. Those 10 digits are all the FBI needs to zero in on the master scammer.
Yeah, we're learning that he is somewhere near Jacksonville, Florida, in a small town called Ocala.
2 days later, an FBI arrest team moves on Firestone at a gym. They find him on a leg machine. The man who has spent 15 years on the run is working on his quadriceps.
He was grateful. From what I got, the feedback I got back, he was grateful that he'd finally got caught. Because one of the first things he said to these FBI agents was, now I can call my mom. You know, it's kind of sweet, you know.
Firestone goes quietly into custody, but he does toss out one final bombshell.
That his real name was Barry Richard Hunt, and that he was wanted by the FBI in New Hampshire.
The fugitive is extradited back to Reno, Nevada, to face trial. On July 8, 2005, Barry Hunt pleads guilty to 1 count of mail fraud and 1 count of bank fraud. He's sentenced to 6 years in prison. As part of the plea deal, Hunt agrees to pay $2.9 million in restitution to his victims.
If we ever see anything, we'll be shocked.
Barry Hunt claims he's broke, and police believe him. They think he blew it all. And at the federal prison near El Paso, where he does his time, Hunt makes a whopping 69 cents an hour.
You know, unless he got out and somebody was following him and he has money stashed offshore somewhere, there's no chance. Unless maybe he hit the lottery.
Hunt's capture also closes the books on the scam he pulled in Exeter, New Hampshire, where it all started. Perhaps surprisingly, most of Hunt's victims here were unaware of his arrest and conviction until American greed came calling.
Well, I was fairly excited to know that I knew where he was now. You know, you always want some closure to the deal. And knowing that I can go out to Texas and see him is pretty good closure.
He certainly had a knack. My charity doesn't go as far as labeling him as a genius, though he may be. But everyone knows what human nature is. It's no secret. It's a matter of whether you take advantage of it. A word he used a lot was greed. He blamed it all on greed. And I never was sure whether he was referring to my greed, the greed of the investors, or his own greed, whether he was saying something in code. But greed was what he felt underlay this whole mess that had developed. I think he was right.
And up next, it's an art heist like you've never seen before.
They were obviously professionals.
Thieves make off with 2 paintings worth $4 million.
It's such a step to anyone who loves art.
When we return, American greed goes into the gallery and inside the crime. It's a daring heist, pulled off by trained professionals, like a scene that was made for the movies. But this time, it's for real.
It was probably the worst experience of our lives.
In July of 2002, burglars break into a gallery in West Hollywood, California, and make a clean getaway with 2 paintings by famed American artist Maxfield Parrish, valued at $4 million.
It's like, a 007 movie. Cutting the roof and breaching the security system, shorting out wires, how they removed the paintings, how they got out, and how they went undetected by doing all this.
The West Hollywood heist has made its way onto the FBI's top 10 list of art crimes. But it all started 1,500 miles away with an art collector in Houston, Texas.
All these paintings down this wall are Texas artists.
J.P. Bryan is a Texas oil man with a penchant for fine art.
And there's the man right there that won the Battle of San Jacinto, Sam Houston, the Sword of San Jacinto, as they like to call it.
Over the past 25 years, Brian has amassed a collection of more than 10,000 pieces, mostly art and artifacts from the Old West.
I love Western art. I love the action that's implied in it. I love the subject matter. And to me, the most fascinating part of the settlement of these United States is the Western part of it. That's Andy Warhol's Custer, Annie Oakley, and Geronimo there. So.
Today, his office appears to be as much an art museum as it is the corporate headquarters of a thriving energy company.
My favorite one was this one right behind my desk, the Longhorn. And there he is, taking the long look, which is what the West is all about. It's about the long view. Art is obviously a central focus of the collection, but there's also an interesting assemblage of spurs, saddles, bridles. And what we tried to do was just not get a gun or a saddle or a bridle, but get something with an interesting provenance.
In May of 1999, J.P. Bryan came across a set of paintings by Maxfield Parrish, a premier American artist.
A friend of mine one day called me and he said, I've got some Maxfield Parrishes that could be for sale. Would you be interested in buying them? No, not really, because I don't collect Parrish. It's just outside my collecting venue.
Although not a collector of Parrish, Bryan saw an opportunity to buy the paintings and turn a quick profit.
You know, Maxfield Parrish, along with Norman Rockwell, are the two greatest American illustrators. And I saw the paintings. I thought they were magnificent.
Maxfield Parrish has an impressive following in the U.S. and is one of the most reproduced artists of all time.
During the 20s, 1 out of every 5 American homes had a Parrish print.
Perhaps no one knows this better than Alma Gilbert Smith, the leading broker in the sale of original Parrish paintings.
Look at that sense of light. It's called the land of make-believe.
The author of 12 books on Parrish, Gilbert lives in the Parrish home and directs a museum dedicated to his work.
I can still almost feel his energy in the paintings. And that's why, at the age of 70, I'm still, maintaining, a museum and doing the tours and things when I have no business doing that at the age of 70. But, I'm there because I love it. I'm there because I get a high every time I see somebody who's seen a Parrish painting for the first time and say, oh my God.
The Parrish art that was up for sale was part of a set of 7 oil paintings commissioned by Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney in the early 1900s.
She wanted something in a mural form that would be very, very special for her home. And she wanted to show young people all dressed up having a wonderful time, like a party. This is the north wall panel.
The north wall of the reception room held one panel measuring 18 feet, and the 3 surrounding walls each held 2 paintings that measured 8.5 by 5.5 feet. Together, they depict a continuous scene of a party.
And they would be connected. So, it was surround sound with Whitney murals. This is the longest single work that Parrish ever did.
In June of 1999, the north wall panel goes on display in Alma Gilbert's museum, and J.P. Bryan purchases the 6 remaining murals.
I love the historical connection because they were done for Ms. Vanderbilt Whitney, who was at the time arguably the greatest collector of American paintings of anybody during that period.
Bryan consigns the 6 paintings to Edenhurst, a fine art gallery in Southern California, where interest in Maxfield Parrish runs high.
There's a number of people in the entertainment community that are fascinated with Maxfield Parrish works, and so obviously many of those people, residents, are in California.
I think art is the ultimate collectible. It's certainly the most valuable collectible.
Tom Gianetto is the co-owner of Edenhurst Gallery, and a man who has spent 3 decades studying and dealing in fine art.
Maxfield Parrish is a very important American painter, so to have these very large canvases was a privilege and an honor, and wonderful to have them around. We had people coming in from all over the world.
For 12 months, the paintings hang here at Edenhurst's West Hollywood location, where they are shown daily to potential buyers.
The asking price was $15 million for the 6 paintings.
There seemed to be a lot of interest. Matter of fact, we had, I think, Edenhurst would know better, but my recollection is they had several offers.
I almost felt I was like an MC for that year that they were there. I mean, I entertained a lot of people.
And while some come perhaps to buy, Many more come just to look.
We had all kinds of people. We had students, we had art collectors, we had curious dabblers. Most people had never even seen a parish in person, certainly had never seen such large parishes. So we had every kind of person.
What Giannetto doesn't realize is that some of those faces in the crowd could be quietly casing his gallery, waiting for the perfect moment to make off with the prized paintings.
We felt protected in every way because we had everything in place as far as security goes. As much as you think you are protected, you really aren't, because if someone wants something, they can go to extreme measures to get what they want. And in this case, someone really wanted those works of art.
July 29th, 2002. Just another Monday morning in L.A. But for gallery owner Tom Giannetto, today will be the worst day of his life.
I first got the news via cell phone call on my way to the gallery. The parishes are gone. There are 2 parishes missing.
The 2 parishes are paintings by the famed American artist Maxfield Parrish, valued at $4 million.
I arrived to see that they had actually been cut from their stretcher bars. It's just an emotional meltdown. Your mind races and you think of all the thefts of all the great works of art, and you realize that here it is happening to you.
I was working out of West Hollywood Station, primarily crimes against persons.
Scott Petz is a detective with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department.
And so we were sent over there right away because we heard it was a high dollar loss theft. And there's the gallery with the 2 missing pieces right there.
2 massive frames hang on the wall, empty. The treasured artwork carefully sliced out.
Yeah, you can see there was the little portions in the corner of the painting that was left behind. So that's some of the paint that just had flaked off during the cut.
Detective Petz looks for clues, but finds the gallery relatively undisturbed.
It wasn't damaged. There wasn't things thrown about or strewn about. But we did notice right away that there was a ladder in the kitchen area.
From the kitchen, Petz discovers the spot where the thieves came and went.
Yeah, this is the drop ceiling. You can see if you look up through there, there's the hole in the roof that's actually cut out. They gained access by cutting out a 4x4 section of the roof. The weak point in virtually any commercial structure right there. It's plywood that's covered with a composite material and some tar. And it's generally not covered by alarms or by extra security, so it's a common place for them to enter. So what they did is they cut through the roof, got down to the drop ceiling.
Inside the drop ceiling, the thieves had access to the alarm system and the skill to defuse it.
They went into the electrical panel up in the subroof. They stripped the wires and they shorted out that keypad.
The intruders intentionally tripped the alarm, then sat back to watch as police responded 8 separate times. With each call, police and security found no signs of a break-in. They soon began to suspect that the alarm system itself was faulty.
So the alarm was set off late Saturday evening. The following day at 4 o'clock, the paintings are still in place.
By Sunday morning, everyone had concluded that the alarm was broken and simply stopped responding.
People's reaction tends to wane because they feel that it's a false alarm. And that's what the owners believed. That's what the deputies began to believe. And I'm sure the security company themselves started to believe that, yeah, we have a bad security alarm.
And with that, the thieves went to work, slipping through the hole in the roof and into the dark gallery. They sliced the canvases from their frames, rolled them up, and made a clean getaway with $4 million of art in tow.
They were obviously professionals.
Professionals who went in specifically to take 2 of the Maxfield Parrish canvases.
Although they had other very valuable pieces there was nothing else missing.
In fact, there were very valuable pieces sitting very nearby on the floor because they were ready to be hung. There were paintings worth millions of dollars as well in the near vicinity.
Which told you that these items were targeted.
And why those 2 when there were 6, we don't know.
Detective Petz works the case for 4 months, but finds very little in the way of leads.
We didn't have any eyewitnesses and no physical evidence other than a 1 foot impression print that we had. That was only partial and wasn't able to yield a size or a particular type of shoe. So no, we never got any traction on it at all. We never had any suspect or even a person of interest.
Well, it's like the death of a friend.
The news hits hard for J.P. Bryan, the owner of the stolen paintings.
They sort of walk away from you gradually in your memory. It's the same thing with art. I mean, you feel very angered and unhappy about it initially, but then, over time, you finally adjust to the circumstances. So when it's finished, this will be mapping Texas in the west.
J.P. Bryan doesn't expect to see the paintings returned in his lifetime.
No. I think whoever got them was very specific in their desires to own those particular panels. And until they die, I don't think they'll ever emerge again.
Unfortunately, Bryan is not alone. Art theft is a growing trend worldwide. It's big business, accounting for nearly $6 billion in losses each year.
It's definitely a rising crime problem in the world, and it's really a global problem.
Chris Calarco is one of 12 in the FBI's art crime team, special agents who investigate and recover stolen art, artifacts, and antiquities.
I kind of approach my art cases like I would approach any other major theft type of case. Is like, you look at, who are the thieves who could pull this particular thing off, who are the known thieves that you know about. We have informants that are out giving us information all the time about people who are doing particular crimes. And these are a couple pieces of the art that we recovered.
Since its inception in 2004, the team has recovered 850 items worth more than $65 million, including a Rembrandt self-portrait worth $36 million, and Norman Rockwell's Russian schoolroom valued at $700,000.
These are photographs of the stolen murals.
In March 2005, Calarco picks up the case of the stolen Maxfield Parrish paintings and turns to the media for help.
With a case like this, we try to get the story out in the media again, to try to breathe some new life into it. And, this case or this particular art theft was put on the FBI's top 10 art crimes.
When the FBI releases a list of the top 10 art crimes in the world, the Maxfield Parrish canvases are number 8. The list generates numerous tips, but nothing that takes Calarco to the paintings. For now, the case remains open and active.
We just hope that somewhere out there, somebody is going to see the art or hear about it in the news and say, you know what, I saw that piece. So-and-so has that piece in their house, or they heard someone talking about it at a cocktail party. I'm going to call the FBI, and hopefully that will be the type of tip that breaks the case open for me.
If you have any information about the Maxfield Parrish murals, please contact the FBI at 310-477-6565. Or leave a tip at americangreed.cnbc.com. In an upcoming episode of American Greed,
nobody had heard from him nor seen him, so I decided to call the police.
A patient ends up dead.
I found him dead in his kitchen, laying on the floor with Dr. Barnes' prescription in his hand.
Was it the illness, or was it the doctor?
March 2018, just as he was suing Rick, the bank had discovered the discrepancies. He was fired. He was arrested. He was desperate. Every day, he lied to his wife, Alyssa. He woke up, put on his suit, and left the house as if he were still the successful banker she had married. In reality, he was spending his days simmering in a red Mini Cooper, wandering the outskirts of Tulsa and Claremore, his mind looping back to the only person he believed could solve his problems. Rick has the money. Rick has the land. Rick is the reason I'm in this mess. By November 2018, the simmer had reached a boiling point. The court hearing for the headstone was approaching, and Kevin knew that if Rick won the restraining order, his last psychological grip on his mother's legacy would be severed. He didn't just want the money anymore. He wanted Rick Swan gone. Chapter 8. November 15th, the red Mini Cooper. The morning was crisp. Rick Swan was in his shop, a massive metal building that housed his tools, his memories, and his luxury RV. He was preparing for the day, perhaps thinking about the afternoon hearing, unaware that a red Mini Cooper was parked just outside his closed gate. A neighbor noticed the car. It stood out a vibrant, sporty splash of color against the rural Oklahoma landscape. It was 10:40 a.m. Kevin Foster sat in the driver's seat, his hands gripping the steering wheel. In his pocket was a 9mm handgun. In the back seat were gas cans. He had planned this, but the planning hadn't dulled the edge of his rage. He moved through the gate. He entered the shop. The details of the confrontation are lost to the shadows, but the forensic evidence tells a brutal story. 3 shots from a 9mm, 1 to the abdomen, 1 to the chest, and the final, cold-blooded execution, a bullet to the back of the head. Rick Swan, the man who had bought Kevin a car, a trailer, and an education, fell face down on the floor of his own sanctuary. But for Kevin, killing him wasn't enough. He needed to erase the evidence, and perhaps, in his warped mind, he needed to watch Rick burn just as he felt his own life was burning. He dragged the body into the RV. He doused the interior with gasoline. As the first flames began to lick the upholstery, Kevin did something that only a truly hollow soul would do. He pulled out his cell phone. He took a picture of the body. He recorded a 1-second video of the smoke billowing out as he walked away. He wanted a trophy. Chapter 9. The Alibi and the Smashed Phone. At 3 p.m. that same day, the court clerk in Tulsa County saw a familiar face. Kevin Foster arrived for the hearing, looking every bit the grieving son and aggrieved litigant. He knew Rick wouldn't show up. He knew the emergency at Rick's property would eventually reach the court. By appearing, he was building his wall his alibi. Mr. Peters, Kevin said into his phone later that day, leaving a voicemail for Rick's attorney. I'm curious to know why we couldn't meet. My mother deserves to be resting in peace. I'd like to know what the next step is. It was a performance for an audience of one, the police. When the OSBI Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation agents first knocked on his door, Kevin was rational. He denied being in Claremore. He claimed he was at work. But when the agents showed him surveillance images of his red Mini Cooper speeding away from the scene, the banker vanished. He became combative. He wrestled with the officers. He was arrested for obstruction, but the murder charge was still hovering just out of reach. Investigators searched his home and his car. Inside the Mini Cooper, they found a cell phone. It wasn't just off, it was destroyed. The screen was a spider web of cracks. The casing bent as if someone had tried to crush the life out of it with a hammer. They also found a key to a safety deposit box. Inside that box, tucked away in the cold dark of a bank vault, was the 2-carat diamond ring, the sentimental treasure Kevin claimed he didn't have. Chapter 10, The Digital Ghost. Detective Miller sat in the forensics lab, watching the technician work on the smashed phone. "Think you can get anything?" Miller asked. "He tried his best to kill it," the tech replied. "But these things have long memories." It took days, but the digital ghost of Kevin Foster began to speak. First came the GPS coordinates. On the morning of November 15th, the phone had pinged right in the heart of Rick Swan's property. Then came the images. The tech scrolled past photos of Kevin's wife, photos of his dog, and then there it was, a grainy, horrific image of a human body splayed out and surrounded by orange flames. A live-action shot of Rick Swan's final moments. He photographed it. Miller whispered, a chill running down his spine. He stood there and watched it. But the most damning evidence didn't come from a high-tech lab. It came from the brother Rick had left behind. Chapter 11, The Game Cam Silent Witness. Chris Swan was cleaning out his brother's scorched shop months after the murder. The pain was still fresh, the smell of smoke still clinging to the rafters. Under a pile of debris, his foot hit something plastic. It was a game camera. Rick had mentioned he'd hidden them to catch varmints or intruders. This one had been knocked over, forgotten by both the killer and the initial search teams. Chris handed it to the police, his hands trembling. When the images loaded, the room went silent. The camera, triggered by emotion, had captured a silent movie of a murder. 10:50 a.m., Rick Swan enters the frame, turning on the lights. 10:51 a.m., a shoe enters the frame, then a hand holding a 9mm pistol. It's Kevin Foster. 10:55 a.m., Kevin emerges from the RV. He is carrying a heavy bag of stolen goods. He is wearing one glove. 11 o'clock a.m., Kevin is seen walking with red gas cans. The camera had captured the executioner in his own words, or rather, his own movements. There was no more room for manufactured evidence or banker alibis. Chapter 12, The Jailhouse Confrontation. The prosecution knew they had the man, but they wanted the maximum sentence. They needed to break the support system Kevin still relied on. His wife, Alyssa. They invited her to the station. They showed her the photos from the phone. They showed her the silent witness of the game camera. "I saw him," Alyssa, Detective Miller said gently. "I saw him light the fire." Alyssa's world shattered. The man she thought she knew was a monster. That night, she made a video call to Kevin in jail. The police recorded every second. There was a game cam. "Kevin," she said, her voice brittle. "It shows a picture of you lighting him on fire." "Kevin, stop. How long were you planning this? I'm not discussing this." Kevin shouted, the mask finally falling away to reveal the terrified, angry boy underneath. They want to manufacture evidence. They've lied to you. I saw you. Kevin, she whispered. I saw you. Get real with yourself. He hung up. It was the last time they would ever truly speak as husband and wife. Epilogue, the final will. The trial lasted 8 days. Kevin Foster took the stand, attempting to spin a tale of self-defense, claiming Rick had attacked him. But the jury looked at the photos of the burning body. They looked at the game cam footage of Kevin carrying gas cans with cold precision. They found him guilty on every count. Kevin Foster was sentenced to 45 years in federal prison. In the eyes of Oklahoma law, for a man of his age, it was a life sentence. He would die in a cage, far from the land he had tried to steal and the mother whose name he had tried to weaponize. Chris Swan eventually found one last thing in his brother's belongings. A note, written in Rick's rough hand, to be found if I'm gone. Don't be sad for me. It read, I'm where I want to be. I'm with Kathy now. Rick Swan had finally found the peace that had eluded him in life. And in the end, his final insult-to-will that left Kevin exactly $1 was the only inheritance the prodigal son would ever receive. The ashes of Rogers County had finally settled, but the story of the banker who killed for a ring would be whispered in Claremore for generations to come. Grave betrayal, the embers of greed. Prologue, the October wind. The wind in Claremore, Oklahoma, has a way of carrying secrets across the prairie. In the fall of 2018, it carried the scent of scorched metal and something far more sinister, the smell of a life extinguished in malice. Rick Swan was a man built from the very soil of Rogers County. He was a man of the earth, of the dairy, and of the long, lonely miles of the pipeline. He believed in hard work, the sanctity of a handshake, and the enduring power of love, even when that love was buried 6 feet under a granite slab. But Rick didn't know that the boy he had treated as a son was stoking a fire that no amount of Oklahoma rain could ever put out. Chapter 1, The Inferno at Dawn. The morning of November 15th began with a silence that felt heavy, like the humidity before a storm. At 10:40 a.m., the peace of the Swan property was shattered not by a scream, but by the crackle of hungry flames. When the 911 call came in, the dispatcher heard the urgency in the neighbor's voice. Smoke was billowing from the large metal barn on the edge of the property, a landmark of the Swan family's success. By the time the fire trucks roared down State Highway 20, the sky was bruised with charcoal clouds. Fire Chief Miller jumped from the truck, his boots hitting the gravel with a thud. Get that overhead door down, he barked. The heat was a physical wall. Inside the barn, a luxury RV-RIC's pride and joy. His escape from the grief that had shadowed him for 2 years was a skeleton of glowing orange. The fireman hooked a winch to the charred chassis and yanked it out into the cool morning air, hoping to save the structure. But as the mist from the hoses settled, the water turning to steam against the blackened metal. A grim realization took hold. "Chief," a young firefighter called out, his voice cracking. "We've got a body." Rick Swan was found face down. In the professional eyes of the investigators, who arrived shortly after, something was wrong. In a typical fire death, the body assumes a pugilistic pose, limbs curled inward as muscles contract from the heat. Rick lay flat, his arms and legs splayed. He hadn't died from the smoke. He had been placed there. The medical examiner would later confirm the brutality. 3 9mm rounds, one to the abdomen, one to the chest, and the final, coldest shot to the back of the head. It wasn't just a murder, it was an execution followed by a desecration. Chapter 2: The Fabric of a Family. To understand the fire, one had to understand the man. Rick Swan and his brother, Chris, were the salt of the earth. They grew up on a dairy farm where the day began at 4 a.m. and ended when the work was done. Rick was always the one who pushed harder. Chris would later recall, staring at old photos of them in denim overalls. He worked the pipeline, traveling across the country, but his heart was always in Claremore. He just wanted a family. He just wanted someone to come home to. That someone arrived in the form of Kathy Pavey Foster. They were childhood friends who rediscovered each other in the autumn of their lives. At 45, Rick fell with the intensity of a teenager. He didn't just love Kathy, he adored her. He proposed with a 2-carat diamond ring that caught the Oklahoma sun, a symbol of a new beginning for both of them. But Kathy carried shadows that Rick couldn't always light up. She struggled with a deep, episodic depression. Rick, ever the provider, became her rock. He didn't just take on Kathy, he took on her two sons from a previous marriage, Brandon and Kevin. Brandon was the older, more distant one. But Kevin was the one Rick tried to save. She'd kicked Kevin out. Rick once told his best friend, Tommy Barrett, over a fishing line. But I can see it hurts her. A mother needs her boy. I'm gonna bring him back. I'm gonna give him a chance. Rick bought Kevin a trailer. He bought him a car. He helped him get into school. He treated the boy not as a stepson, but as a legacy. Chapter 3: The Crack in the Foundation. For 11 years, the Swan household was a place of relative peace. Kevin found a job at a bank in Tulsa. He looked professional, spoke well, and seemed to be the success story Rick had prayed for. But the peace was a fragile glass. In October 2016, the darkness finally claimed Kathy. Her suicide sent Rick into a tailspin of grief so profound that his friends feared he would follow her into the grave. I found a note. Rick told Chris months later, his voice a ghost of its former self. She was hurting so much. Chris, I didn't see it all. I should have seen it. As Rick began a slow, agonizing process of rebuilding his life, he reached out to Kevin. He thought they could grieve together. In a gesture of ultimate trust, Rick added Kevin's name to one of his bank accounts. He's family, Rick told his attorney, Steve Peters. and I don't have anyone else to leave it to. It was the most expensive mistake of his life. The entitlement began as a simmer. Kevin, facing his own financial demons and a growing sense of greed, didn't see Rick as a grieving father figure. He saw him as an obstacle between himself and what he believed was his rightful inheritance. I want half the estate, Rick, Kevin had demanded during a tense dinner in late 2017. My mother's half. Rick had stared at him, bewildered. Kevin, your mother and I built this together, and most of the land was mine before we even met. I've given you $7,500 in loans you haven't touched. I've helped you every step of the way. It's not enough, Kevin had replied, his eyes cold and dark. The feud had begun. Chapter 4, The Desecration of Peace. By March 2018, the gloves were off. Kevin filed a lawsuit against the man who had clothed and fed him. Rick, heartbroken and realizing he was being preyed upon, fought back with a countersuit. But Kevin's warfare wasn't just legal, it was psychological. Items began to vanish from Rick's house. A photo of Kevin's own wedding, small pieces of jewelry, and then the ultimate blow, the 2-carat diamond ring Rick had given Kathy. I know he's coming in here, Rick recorded on a voice memo, his breath hitching. I can see the dust where the pictures used to be. He's taking her things. He's trying to erase me. The escalation reached its peak at the Woodlawn Cemetery. Rick had visited Kathy's grave, seeking the only comfort he had left, only to find the headstone had been moved. A new one had been placed there, one that removed the name, Kathy Swan, and replaced it with her maiden name. It was a cold, calculated attempt to strip Rick of his marriage, even in death. It was meant to hurt him, Steve Peters said, and it did. It broke what was left of his heart. A court hearing was set for November 15th at 3 p.m. to address the restraining order Rick had filed against Kevin. Rick Swan never made it to that hearing. As the sun rose on that fateful Thursday, a red Mini Cooper, a car far too distinctive for a man trying to hide, was seen idling near Rick's gate. Inside the barn, Rick was checking his RV, perhaps planning a trip to clear his head. He didn't hear the footsteps. He didn't see the shadow of the boy he had called son, holding a 9mm pistol. The first shot hit Rick in the abdomen, dropping him to the floor of the RV. The second pierced his chest. As Rick lay dying, gasping for air in the home he had built with love, Kevin Foster walked up and placed the barrel against the back of his stepfather's head. Click! Then came the gasoline. Then came the match. Kevin Foster didn't just want Rick dead. He wanted him gone. He wanted the evidence of his life turned to ash. But Kevin Foster was about to learn that in the digital age, fire doesn't hide everything. And Rick Swan, even in his final moments of fear, had set a trap that the killer never saw coming. Chapter 5, The Red Spectre. Detectives stood among the ruins, the air thick with the acrid scent of plastic and bone. While the fire had been efficient, it wasn't absolute. Sifting through the debris, investigators found 3 9mm shell casings brass signatures left by a killer who thought the flames would swallow them whole. The first break in the case didn't come from the ashes, but from a neighbor with a keen eye. There was a car, the man told Agent Miller, a red Mini Cooper, parked right outside Rick's gate at 10:40, stood out like a drop of blood on a white sheet. In a small community like Claremore, such a vehicle was a beacon. Detectives fanned out, pulling footage from local gas stations along State Highway 20. The surveillance systems were robust, and the results were chilling. A red Mini Cooper was captured passing a station, then later speeding away from the Swan residence at a pace that suggested panic disguised as haste. The car led them directly to Kevin Foster. When OSBI agents knocked on Kevin's door, they expected a grieving stepson. Instead, they found a man of ice. Kevin was professional, rational, and entirely to calm. He claimed to have been in court, to have been at work. "I wasn't in Claremore today," he stated firmly, even when shown the grainy images of his own car. But as the questioning deepened, the mask slipped. When agents asked if he owned a firearm, the upstanding banker vanished. Kevin became physically combative, a cornered animal lashing out at the men in suits. He was arrested on the spot for obstruction, but the murder charge was still a ghost in the distance. Chapter 6: Breadcrumbs in the Cloud. While Kevin sat in a jail cell, his wife Alyssa remained at their home, bewildered. To her, Kevin was a successful professional. She didn't know the bank had fired him for embezzlement months earlier. She didn't know he was drowning in debt. She handed over his two handguns, convinced they would prove his innocence. One was a 9mm. Back at the precinct, digital forensics experts were working on a different kind of puzzle. They had recovered Kevin's cell phone from his car. It was smashed, the screen a spider web of cracks, an obvious attempt to destroy its contents. But the data lived in the silicon. GPS coordinates placed the phone exactly at Rick Swan's property at the time of the fire. And then they found the deleted folder. The lead investigator felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. There, in the digital memory, were photos taken on the morning of November 15th. The first was a picture of Rick Swan's body, face down, already beginning to burn. It was a trophy, a snapshot of a successful execution. The second was a short video of the smoke billowing from the barn as Kevin walked away. He hadn't just killed the man who raised him, he had documented the destruction of his soul. Chapter 7: The Silent Witness in the Trees. Weeks passed. The evidence was mounting, but the defense was preparing to argue that the photos were manufactured or taken under duress. That was when Chris Swan returned to his brother's charge shop to begin the heartbreaking task of cleaning. "I saw something on the ground," Chris recounted, his voice trembling, half buried in the soot. A game camera. Rick had been a hunter, and in his final months of paranoia, he had repurposed his gear. He had hidden game cameras around his property to catch the person he believed was breaking into his home. When detectives loaded the SD card, the room went silent. The images were time-stamped. 10:38 a.m. Rick Swan enters the frame, turning on the lights of the barn. He looks tired, but peaceful. 10:39 a.m. A shoe enters the frame. A professional shoe. 10:40 a.m. Kevin Foster appears. In his hand, a 9mm pistol. He is moving toward the RV with the cold precision of a soldier. 10:45 a.m. Kevin exits the RV. He is carrying a bag of stolen items, the rings, the sentimental trophies of his mother's life. 10:47 a.m. Kevin returns with gasoline cans. 10:50 a.m. The frame turns orange. The smoke begins to swirl. The silent witness had seen it all. There was no room for doubt, no room for self-defense. Chapter 8. The voicemail from purgatory. Before the trial, investigators met with Alyssa Foster. They showed her the photos. They showed her the game camera footage. The woman who had defended her husband broke down. The reality of the monster she shared a bed with finally coming into focus. She agreed to a recorded video call with Kevin in jail. There was a game cam. Kevin, she said, her voice a hollow whisper. It shows everything. It shows you lighting him on fire. Kevin's reaction was his final betrayal. He didn't cry. He didn't apologize. He hissed at her through the glass. They're manufacturing evidence. They're lying to you. I'm not talking about this anymore. I saw you. Kevin, she cried. How long were you planning this? Kevin hung up. He had no more lies left for the woman he loved. He only had the silence of his own greed. Chapter 9. The Verdict of Claremore. The trial in November 2019 lasted 8 grueling days. Kevin Foster took the stand, attempting to spin a tale of a crazed Rick Swan who had fired at him first. But the ballistics, the GPS, the deleted photos, and the haunting images from the game camera made his testimony look like the desperate ramblings of a failed embezzler. When the jury returned, they didn't just find him guilty, they returned the maximum sentence. 45 years in federal prison for Chris Swan and Tommy Barrett. The justice was cold. It didn't bring Rick back. It didn't bring back the dairy farm boy who just wanted a family. I found a note. Chris said at the memorial. Rick had hidden it. It said, "If you find this, I'm gone. Don't be sad. I'm where I want to be with Kathy." Rick Swan had known the fire was coming. He had prepared his heart even as he prepared his trap. He died in a house of flames, but he left behind a light that ensured the truth would never be turned to ash. The wind in Claremore still carries secrets, but on the Swan property, there is finally a quiet peace. The red Mini Cooper is gone. The lawsuits are settled. And under the Oklahoma stars, Rick and Kathy Swan are finally resting under the same name, side by side, forever. Ashes of Betrayal, a novel based on a true crime. Prologue, The Smoke over Claremore. The Dawn over Claremore, Oklahoma. in the fall of 2018 didn't break with the usual golden promise of the Great Plains. Instead, it arrived shrouded in a thick, acrid gray that clung to the frost on the grass. It was 10:40 a.m. when the first call crackled through the dispatch center. A neighbor on the outskirts of town had noticed a column of black smoke rising from the property of Rick Swan. In a community like this, where everyone knew the rhythm of their neighbors' tractors and the silhouette of their barns, smoke at that hour was a siren of its own. Rick Swan was not just a businessman, he was a pillar. He was the kind of man whose handshake was a contract and whose word was a bond. When the firefighters arrived, they found the large metal barn a structure that had stood as a testament to Rick's hard work surrounded by dancing orange tongues of heat. There's an RV inside. One of the firemen shouted over the roar. The overhead door was a wall of searing metal. They hooked a chain to it, the engine of the fire truck groaning as it yanked the door from its tracks. Inside, the source of the inferno was clear. Rick's RV, his sanctuary, was a skeletal cage of fire. They dragged it out into the gravel yard, dousing it with thousands of gallons of water until the screaming hiss of steam replaced the crackle of flames. But as the mist cleared, the silence that followed was heavier than the smoke. In the charred remains of the RV, face down in the soot, lay a body. His limbs were not curled in the pugilistic stance typical of fire victims, those who succumb to the heat and reflexively draw their arms and legs inward. No, this man lay flat, sprawling, as if he had been discarded. Investigator Miller stepped through the wet ash, his boots crunching on ruined dreams. He knelt, brushing away a layer of gray dust. He didn't need a medical examiner to tell him what he saw. There were holes that the fire hadn't made. One in the abdomen, one in the chest, and the most brutal of all, a dark, jagged entry point at the base of the skull. This wasn't an accident, Miller whispered, the smell of gasoline and burnt rubber filling his lungs. Someone hated this man enough to kill him and then tried to erase him from the earth. Chapter 1, The Pipeline Man. To understand the fire, one had to understand the man who died in it. Rick Swan was born to the dirt and the dawn. Growing up on a dairy farm outside of Claremore, he and his brother Chris had learned early that life was measured in gallons of milk and acres of hay. They were salt of the earth people, the kind of family that formed the invisible fabric of Oklahoma. Rick was a man of contrasts. He was a work hard, play hard soul. When he wasn't tending to the family's land, he was out on the pipelines, a job that took him across the jagged heart of America. He was a nomad for hire, welding the veins of the country together under the searing sun of Texas and the freezing winds of the Dakotas. But as he hit his 40s, the road began to feel longer. The motel rooms felt colder. He wanted what he had spent his life building for others, a home. In 2003, Rick crossed paths again with Kathy Pavey Foster. They had gone to school together decades ago, back when the world was simple and the biggest worry was the Friday night football score. Kathy was a woman who carried a quiet beauty, but also a shadow that Rick, in his optimism, thought he could light up. "You look like you've seen the world, Rick," Kathy had said over their first coffee at a local diner. "I've seen the dirt of 48 states, Kathy," Rick replied, his voice a gravelly rumble. "I think I'm ready to see the same port every morning for a while." Kathy smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. She had two sons, Brandon and Kevin, both nearly grown. She had a history of depression that sat in her chest like a heavy stone, and a past suicide attempt that she spoke of in hushed, shame tones. Rick didn't care about the shadows. He was a builder. He thought he could build a fortress around her heart that the darkness couldn't penetrate. In 2005, on his parents' country estate, Rick proposed. He didn't just give her a ring, he gave her a 2-carat diamond that sparkled like the North Star. He wanted the world to know she was cherished. "I'll take care of everything, Kathy," he whispered as he slid the ring onto her finger. "You, the boys, the future, you're a swan now." And for a few years, it seemed the builder had succeeded. Chapter 2. The Stepson. While Brandon, the older son, was a quiet observer of his mother's new life, Kevin Foster was a different creature entirely. Kevin was intelligent, perhaps too much for his own good. He had a way of looking at Rick's property, the sprawling acres, the cattle, the successful business, not with admiration, but with a silent, simmering calculation. Rick, ever the provider, tried to bridge the gap. He knew Kathy had struggled with Kevin in the past. She had even kicked him out of the house once in a fit of desperation. But Rick saw a chance for redemption. "He's your blood, Kathy," Rick had said. "If he's hurting, we help him." Rick brought Kevin back to Claremore. He bought him a trailer to live in so he could have his independence. He bought him a car so he could find work. He even helped him enroll in school. Rick treated Kevin not as a burden, but as the son he never had. Kevin eventually landed a job at a bank in Tulsa. He wore the suits well. He spoke the language of finance. To the outside world, he was a success story, a young man lifted out of instability by a benevolent stepfather. But inside the Swan household, the air was changing. Kathy's depression wasn't a fire you could douse. It was a slow-growing mold. Despite the diamond ring, the beautiful home, and Rick's unwavering support, the darkness returned in 2016. In October of that year, the fortress Rick had built finally crumbled. Kathy took her own life. Rick found her. The man who had survived the roughest pipeline camps in the country was reduced to a ghost. He stopped eating. He spent hours staring at the horizon where the sun set over the barn. The silence in the house was a physical weight, pressing the air from his lungs. "She's gone, Chris," Rick told his brother one night, his voice hollow. "I did everything. I gave her everything. Why wasn't it enough?" For months later, While cleaning out a drawer he hadn't touched since the funeral, Rick found a note. It was Kathy's handwriting, looped and elegant, yet frantic. It was a suicide note he hadn't known existed. In it, she spoke of the pain that had become a wall she couldn't climb over. Finding the note gave Rick a sliver of peace. It wasn't that he hadn't been enough. It was that the illness was too much. Slowly, painfully, Rick began to step back into the light. He started fishing again. He started looking at his business. He started to believe that at 60, he might still have a second act. He didn't know that the real villain of his story was just beginning his first. Chapter 3, The Accountant's Greed. Death does strange things to families. It can bind them together in grief, or it can strip away the veneer of civility to reveal the rot beneath. With Kathy gone, the bridge between Rick and Kevin Foster collapsed. It started with the money. In October 2017, a year after Kathy's death, Rick, still trying to be the father figure, added Kevin's name to one of his bank accounts. Kevin was working at the bank. After all, he knew how to handle numbers. Rick was busy with the land and the grief. "I trust you, Kevin," Rick had said. "Just help me keep things straight." It was the greatest mistake of his life. Kevin wasn't just handling the money. He was drowning. Unbeknownst to Rick, Kevin's life in Tulsa was a house of cards. He had developed a taste for a lifestyle his salary couldn't support, and he had been caught in a web of financial irregularities at his own job. By the end of 2017, Rick noticed the leaks. First, it was small amounts, a few hundred here, 1,000 there. Rick scolded him, treating it like a wayward child stealing from a cookie jar. "I've loaned you $7,500, Kevin," Rick told him in the farm office, the scent of old paper and diesel in the air. "You need to pay this back. We're family. But business is business." Kevin's face didn't redden with shame. It hardened into a mask of entitlement. "My mother's name was on this estate, Rick," Kevin replied, his voice cold. "I'm her heir. I'm not borrowing anything. I'm taking what's mine. Your mother and I were married. Kevin, this land was mine before she ever stepped foot on it. I gave her a life. I gave you a life." The entitlement grew like a fever. Kevin began demanding more. He wanted half of Rick's land. He wanted the personal property. And then he wanted the ring. "I want the 2-carat diamond," Kevin demanded during a heated phone call. "It's sentimental. It's all I have left of her." Rick gripped the phone, his knuckles white. "Sentimental. You want to hock it, Kevin. I know you. That ring was my promise to her. You're not touching it." In December 2017, the feud became a war. Rick went to the bank to check the account they shared. He expected to see a balance of $20,000. Instead, he found $3,000. Kevin had withdrawn $17,000 in a single week without a word. Rick sat in his truck in the bank parking lot, the engine idling. He felt a sensation he hadn't felt in years, pure, unadulterated betrayal. He had treated this boy like a son. He had saved him from the streets. and in return, Kevin was picking his pockets before his mother's grave had even settled. Rick walked back into the bank and stripped Kevin's name from every account he owned. "The gloves are off," Rick muttered to the empty cab of his truck. Chapter 4, The Desecration. March 2018 brought the first legal salvo. Kevin Foster filed a lawsuit against Rick Swan. It was a desperate, grasping document claiming he was owed a massive portion of Rick's estate as part of his mother's inheritance. There was no legal basis for it, no will, no right of survivorship, but it was a declaration of hate. Rick countersued. He was a pipeline man. He didn't back down from a fight. But the stress was taking its toll. He started noticing things around the house. A picture of Kevin and his wife Alyssa was missing from its frame. The dust on the shelf showed exactly where it had sat. Then, the jewelry boxes. Kathy's other rings, the ones Rick had bought her for anniversaries, were gone. "He's breaking in," Rick told his attorney, Steve Peters. "He has a key I didn't know about, or he's picking the locks. He's ghosting through my house. Steve, I feel like I'm being hunted in my own home." Rick bought game cameras, the kind hunters used to track deer in the Oklahoma brush. He hid them in the trees, on the fence lines, and inside the barn. He began documenting everything. He carried a small recorder, narrating his findings like a man who knew he was living his final chapters. "I'm doing this because I need a record." Rick recorded one evening, his breath heavy in the mic. "In case something happens to me, I want someone to see this. Kevin Foster, he's become something evil." But the true blow came 3 weeks before the end. Rick went to Woodlawn Cemetery to visit Kathy. He liked to talk to her, to tell her about the cattle and the weather. But when he reached the plot, he stopped dead. The headstone he had designed, the one that read Kathy Swan, his wife, was gone. In its place sat a new stone. It was cold, sharp-edged, and bore her maiden name, Kathy Pavey. Kevin had gone to the cemetery under the cover of night, hauled away the monument of Rick's love, and replaced it with a stone that effectively erased Rick from her life. Rick fell to his knees in the grass. It wasn't about money anymore. It wasn't about the $17,000 or the 2-carat ring. This was a desecration of the soul. "You've wiped her out," Rick sobbed into the wind. "You've wiped me out." Rick obtained a temporary restraining order. A hearing was set for November 15, 2018 at 3 p.m. Rick intended to face Kevin in front of a judge and end this madness once and for all. He never made it to the courthouse. Chapter 5, The Red Mini Cooper. November 15, 2018. The morning started like any other for Rick Swan. He had chores to do. He had a shop to organize. He had a life to lead, even if it was a life under siege. At 10:40 a.m., a neighbor driving down State Highway 20 noticed something odd. Parked just outside Rick Swan's closed gate was a vehicle that didn't belong in the world of heavy-duty pickups and dusty farm equipment. It was a red Mini Cooper. Bright, distinctive, and out of place. 30 minutes later, the neighbors saw the smoke. As the firefighters were pulling Rick's body from the ashes, the red Mini Cooper was miles away, speeding through the outskirts of Tulsa. Kevin Foster sat behind the wheel, his hands gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. He was breathing in short, shallow bursts. On the passenger seat lay a smashed cell phone and a 9mm handgun, still warm from its work. He looked at his watch. It was almost noon. He had a court hearing at 3 p.m. He needed to be there. He needed to be the grieving, frustrated son. He needed to look the attorney in the eye and ask why Rick hadn't shown up. But as he drove, a thought began to itch at the back of his mind. A memory of a small, green plastic box he had seen tucked into the shadows of the barn rafters as he was pouring the gasoline. A game camera. He had tried to find them all. He had searched the trees. He had looked at the fence posts. But in his rage, in the adrenaline of the 3 shots, he had fired one to the chest, one to the back, and the final execution in the head he might have missed one. It doesn't matter, Kevin whispered to himself, adjusting his tie in the rearview mirror. The fire will take care of it. The fire takes care of everything. He arrived at the courthouse in Tulsa at 2:55 p.m. He walked with a confident stride, the image of a professional man seeking justice. When Steve Peters, Rick's attorney, didn't see Rick, he was confused. When the clerk announced the hearing was canceled due to an emergency, Kevin played his part to perfection. He called Steve Peters afterward, his voice a masterclass in feigned curiosity. Mr. Peters, this is Kevin Foster. We had a 3 o'clock hearing. I'm curious why we couldn't meet. My mother deserves to rest in peace. And I'm just so tired of all this. What's the next step? On the other end of the line, Steve Peters stood in the shadow of the smoldering barn, watching the coroner load a black bag into a van. He listened to Kevin's voice school, calm and utterly detached. The next step, Kevin. Steve said, his voice trembling with a mix of grief and fury. The next step is the police. Rick is dead. Chapter 6, The Ghost in the Machine. Investigator Miller didn't believe in coincidences. In 20 years of law enforcement, he had learned that the odd thing a neighbor sees is almost always the thread that unravels the tapestry of a lie. We need to find that red Mini Cooper, Miller told his team at the command center. The search didn't take long. Claremore was a small town, and a bright red European compact was like a flare in a